All right. Hi, everybody. We are live today. Thank you all so much for coming out. I am so excited to host this event tonight. We have Richard Lange and Jim Sherman. Welcome, Richard and Jim. Thank you all for attending. It's my honor to introduce both of you. Richard Lange is the author of the story collections Dead Boys and Sweet Nothing and the novels This Wicked World, Angel Baby, and The Smack. He is the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship, the International Association of Crime Writers Dashiell Hammett Prize, a Crime Writers Association Dagger Award, and the Rosenthal Family Foundation Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Jim is also here today. Jim Sherman is a librarian in the Literature and Fiction Department of the Los Angeles Public Library and is adjunct faculty at the Glendale Community College. Jim has worked in film production and script development, as well as programming panels for the Sundance Film Festival. I'm so excited to have you here. I wanted to read a little snippet of a review from Alma Katsu, who wrote The Hunger and the Deep, which we have at Mysterious Galaxy, of Rovers, because so much praise has been said about this book. So what Alma has to say is, reading Rovers was going on a 3-day bender. Once I got started, I couldn't stop. Rovers is a bleak, gritty, violent, and mostly tender portrayal of life as an outsider that happens to be about vampires. The writing is equal to the story, achingly beautiful, by turns inspiring and devastating. So I love that review, and I'm so excited to hear you all talk about it. It's a good one.
It has the virtue of being true, right, as well.
All right, so before I disappear, just in case there are any newcomers to Crowdcast and how our events work, just want to give you a rundown. To the right-hand side is our chat section. So here you can say hello, you can say, talk about your excitement for the book, that sort of thing. But don't put questions in this chat box. Make sure to ask the questions in the Ask a Question button here. That way, Jim will be able to see your questions and ask Richard when we get to the Q&A from the audience. And then last but certainly not least, make sure to check out this blue little button right here to purchase signed copies of Rovers. We are doing signed and personalized copies of Rovers if you buy through Mysterious Galaxy. All right, I think that's it. That's the quick rundown of everything.
Great.
Thank you, Kelly. Go ahead and disappear if I remember how to do that, and take it away.
Great. This is great, Richard. I'm here. I'm a librarian and I work at the Literature Fiction Department. It's funny because that's how I became a fan of your work initially. With Dead Boys, I read that and it just blew me away years ago now. And in fact, one of the most stolen books in the library is Bukowski. And so anyone that couldn't find the Bukowski books, I'd be like, I don't know, if you want to talk about, people living on margins in LA, you should try this book. It blew me away. It was really great. For years, I've been doing that. And it's interesting because all your books are, I've been moved by all your books. And I remember when I read the end of Sweet Nothing, I was really devastated. That last story was so beautiful and amazing. And this latest one is really, when you told me you were writing a horror story, I was like, wow, I don't really read horror or know anything that much about the genre. But it's funny because, yeah, right. Okay. So and this latest is more is still a Richard Lange book. The genre amplifies a lot of the issues like that, like Alma Katsu was talking about, is still talking about people on the margins. It's basically the theme is the people on the margins, they're usually in trouble, right? Trying to make their way and somehow try to escape from their situation. That's a terrible situation. And, despite huge obstacles and a painful past, which were generally created by terrible, horrible mistakes they made in the past, they have these little oases of being humans and seeking these human connections, which stand out stands out like a flower on like a sidewalk. Do you know what I mean? Like a cracked sidewalk, and suddenly it's like out, you see there's a flower coming out, and that's your short stories always remind me of that. So, and you've always liked the outsiders dealing with love and loss, and this is just that more so.
Yeah, they're kind of the ultimate outsiders. I mean, they're a different, I guess I've never really known how to describe them accurately, but they're not a different species. They're sort of like people who have a disease. My take on vampires was very loose. because I didn't want to be tied down by the old
Right.
lore. And as you say, in the end, I'm using all those horror tropes, those vampire tropes specifically, to get at the things that I get in all my fiction, which is the outsiders, people on the margins struggling to get by, make peace with their pasts. There's a lot of that in this book, people dealing with what's happened to them in the past. And they just also happen to have to drink blood once a month. That adds a complication, keeps them moving around constantly.
Or if lucky, they can get away with a whole year, as you read the book and find out why. But it's funny because I was thinking, like, I had you on a panel a long time ago, and you were like, you've been classified. First of all, you've written mystery. You've been in the best mysteries anthology, like I think a while back, and so you've had these. And like I remember I was putting you on a panel. We were talking about kind of neo-noir, and you're like, I don't think of myself as neo-noir. And it's so funny. There's like these kind of, you wear these genres like a loose garment for what you're really talking about, which
exactly. I mean, even when I started writing crime, the reason I started writing crime books was because I sold a book of short stories and I had to have a novel that went with it, and
that's great.
And that because nobody would buy a book of short stories singly, so I ended up pitching what became This Wicked World over the phone to them, and I sold the book on the pitch with I was taking the pitch up. I was saying the other night that I was like looking at my bulletin board and saw what clippings I had taken out of the LA Times, and there was one about crystal meth and one about dog fighting, and I was just sort of like really like Usual Suspects kind of thing. I put it together up there, and they bought it, and so then I had to write the novel, and I had to learn how to write a novel. I mean, I kind of knew how to write short stories. I'd been doing it for 10 years and perfecting it, perfecting that particular art, but a novel's a completely different thing. So I knew I needed something to pull me through it. So I went with the crime genre because I figured I know, a plot I know is someone gets killed in the beginning and you find out at the end who did it. And I figured this would be an easy template that I can then put in all the other stuff that I want to really write about: the desert, dogfighting, the counterfeiting, and LA around the neighborhood around MacArthur Park. So I could lay all that stuff on there, but I would have these sort of stations that I had to hit that would keep me moving forward, because my short stories are much more meandering. And so I used that as a structure. I mean, I blew it. I told you who killed the guy, the guy in the third chapter, and then I ended up narrating chapters through his POV. So I kind of screwed it up, but at least it gave me a base. And I hadn't read much crime then. I'd read, a lot of Elmore Leonard, who I guess he's crime, but I maybe read a couple Chandlers.
Well, but a good example. He's crime, but no one picks up Elmore Leonard and going to mistake it with like Anne Rule or True Crime, right? There's so much. It's a good example because there's so much more going on.
I think a lot of those kind of readers don't really appreciate, Elmore Leonard for what he is. A lot more literary people, appreciate Elmore Leonard for the way he works his dialogue, and he's got a great way with moving a plot along, and
he's a great example of genre switching too, because he did his westerns, right? So he did, he did stuff like that. He's a good example. But it's interesting you say that your short stories meander, maybe, but I think the why it works is because your short stories are so good at environment and mood and getting this idea across, and that's obviously present in your novels, and especially this one. There's all these great, there's this great line, for instance, they talk about the Rovers are looking for somebody, and there's a great line about how they're in a they're waiting outside a bar, and the bar closes, and there's a line you have where it's they're outside, closing bar, the drinkers were pushed out of the tavern like people whose houses have been whirled away by a tornado, but there wasn't a rover among them. And you've got this great in an economical way You kind of explain, like, you've got that, you can see that whole thing, and so much of your writing is so visual because you have such power of description. I've got a, but at any rate, I've got a lot to say about that.
The stories then were probably good training. I mean,
Yeah.
I obviously learned something in the writing the stories that I could put into that. But what I didn't learn from the stories was plot and how to keep that moving. And so,
Right.
In the same way that I hadn't read much crime. I'd read the Elmore Leonard, and I was into Ross McDonald. But more than that, I hadn't really read a lot of crime. In the same way, when I sat down to do Rovers, I hadn't read a lot of horror. I read Dracula when I was a kid. I read a few Stephen Kings in high school, junior high school. But since the age of 18 or 19, I hadn't read horror, and I didn't know. I'd seen a few horror films now and then, but I figured, well, I'm gonna dive into it in the same way. I know how to tell a story. And if I can tell a good story, and these people and the characters happen to have this affliction, in addition to that, then it'll work out. And it ended up. I think it worked out. And
no, it definitely did. It definitely did. So the genre is really just like a guardrail, on the road that we're traveling. So it really, it really works. And it's funny because
something familiar to draw people, to get people to go in and follow me, because I mean, in this book especially, I have to make you like murderers through the whole book. You're following in this. You're seeing 90% of this book, or 75% of it, through the eyes of people who are murderers. And I've always been pretty good at getting people to feel, maybe not affection, but maybe understanding for junkies and the other kinds of people, thieves, and the people I've written about. But when it comes to getting people to empathize with these bloodthirsty killers, that was was going to be a trick. And so,
it's funny. Yeah, I think you do that right off the bat. I actually would like to take the time to read a first chapter, although I do. Okay. It's funny, when you were talking about sympathizing with the junkies, I mean, essentially these vampires are more like junkies than anything else. They're on the margin of society, especially when one of the characters actually has a description of like a devil that talks to him in his head, and it very much reads like somebody who's got an addiction and just has to do it, and it's funny, sometimes they're stuck doing with feeding on people that there are really who's actually we're not so great, and so it's almost like a bad drug, and they describe it, I think,
right
one part where they as dirty water, they describe it or something. It's really good. I don't want to give away too much.
The idea behind the book is that they feed on, which I don't know. I tell the book. The book basically my pitch was of Mice and Men with vampires. That was how I was originally going to sell it, and I ended up setting it back in 1976 on the eve of the bicentennial. It's like 4 or 5 days leading up to July 4th, 1976. Takes place mostly in Phoenix and Las Vegas, Reno, the Southwest. And it's about these rovers who are vampires. There's a couple different groups of them moving around. And one is a biker gang. One is two brothers. One of them's a mentally challenged. And it's just basically a revenge thriller set around these people, moving around, and, stuff happens. But Jim, you could, if you want to read the opening.
Well, and that's the thing, because it kind of explains how it kind of like really gets. Well, I'll just read it, because the very first chapter says, Jesse dreams the old dream for the first time in months. He hasn't been sleeping much lately, and when he hasn't dreamed. On bad days, he lies there for hours, tossing and turning. On good ones, he drops his lids and dies until the sun goes down. Today, though, one minute he's staring up at the water-stained ceiling of the motel room, listening to the maid argue with the manager out in the parking lot, listening to Edgar snore on the other bed, and the next, the dream. It reappears like a friend he hadn't known how much he missed until, hey, there he is again, the rascal. It's the only dream he dreams, so he's fond of it. It's the only time the world isn't just what it is. He's walking down a road, always the same road, a road he's traveled in his waking life, but not one where he can place exactly. Somewhere near Barstow, maybe, somewhere outside Las Cruces. scrubland where the plants bristle with thorns and the hot wind never stops blowing, where the train tracks slice across salt flats like ropey old scars, and the air is so clear what's 10 miles away looks like 2. He's walking alone in the stream, and how he knows it's a dream is that it's daytime. He hasn't been outside during the day in more than 75 years. 75 years since he's felt the sun on his face. 75 years since he's lain under a tree and run his fingers over leaf shadows flitting across a patch of warm grass. 75 years since he squinted through his lashes to pin a cawing raven against the noon glare. For the past 3/4 of a century, he's lived by night in the even hours when monsters hunt and good folks sleep in their houses. Since he turned, every dawn's been a death sentence, every sunbeam a white-hot razor. That's why he's overjoyed whenever he dreams his only dream, when he finds himself walking that road under the blazing sun, under a few wisps of clouds unraveling across the sky. A bounding jackrabbit kicks up dust. A breeze brings a whiff of sage. He comes upon an empty pop can and gives it a kick. Light and warmth warm their way into the coldest, darkest thickets inside him. And if he never woke again, he'd be fine. This would be enough. The road, the sky, the sun, forever. And right there, you've got it, because this guy is, what's one of the main themes of this is loss, right? Mm-hmm. There's something that he can't be like a normal person ever again, and he has loss. And then what then slams you into it, like if it's very visual, like a movie, it's like there's next paragraph break goes into Jesse, and Jesse opens his eyes. The ceiling is dark. Night has come down. Jesse, what? I pissed myself. Jesse sits up. His brother Edgar is lying in the other bed in his own mess. Even Abby, Edgar's cat, has more sense than that. At least she was smart enough to jump down to the floor. Jesse exhales his disgust. He doesn't mean for Edgar to hear it, but hear it he does. I'm sorry, Edgar says and starts to cry. It's all right. You've been doing better. 10 years have passed since Edgar last had trouble holding his water, and Jesse can't figure out why the problem has returned. And it goes into, the fact that that Edgar is mentally challenged, and he wonders, can he really be that simple? You teach a dog a trick, a horse, and it remembers forever. So how come every few years he has to remind a grown man not to steal potato chips from the store? Could it be Edgar's messing with him and secretly reveling in this frustration? And in this one thing, you have oh my God, this guy is taking care of this his younger brother, who's looks like his father because he's 25 years older. This enormous man child who wets the bed and won't stop singing Convoy, or the theme song for Convoy. And he was just has to be constantly watched and monitored because he's got the mental age of a 10-year-old and the body of a big bruiser. And it's like, oh my God, it dawns you, okay, he's stuck forever taking care of his brother. It's like the worst, longest road trip that will never end.
Right. Because of a promise he made to his mom,
yep.
70 years earlier.
And that is so intense. That's 3 pages. That's like the whole thing right there. And it's like you're right in it. I believe in
dumping people into it and getting it going. And I want to keep them reading. And
oh my God, it does it so well. My daughter read this and she said it's amazing how it just goes and goes. She was saying, and it's split into the voice. There's 4 voices in the book. There's basically, there's Jesse, which is a very
four POVs, really, yeah.
It's what?
4 POVs,
that's right.
Not voice. Third person, it's technical. Yes, 4
No,
voices.
but you're right. Except one of them, you're right, and then one of them is, and Edgar gets to talk, and Edgar's sort of like the Sound and the Fury, reminding me of the Florian Faulkner.
It's a little like P.G. Compton, stream of consciousness, his perception of things, and then through that, I'm building that character, because if you just saw him from his brother's perspective, or
that's right,
from the other character's perspectives, you would just see this mentally challenged, man. But by going into his mind, I'm able to build his character a lot more and give him, a mind of his own. You find out he does have feelings and emotions and goals. He
has a rich internal life.
Yeah, he does. And then the third point of view is the letters from a man whose son was murdered, and he's trying to find out. He feels guilty because he did some things that made his son leave home, and his son went on the road and at some point was murdered, and he feels responsible for that.
That's
so a year after the death, he cleaned out the family bank accounts and bought a van, and he drives around the Southwest, following a string of postcards that the son had sent the mother. You know, they were estranged, but he still communicated with the mother. And so it's, you know, Portland, Reno, San Francisco. He's been following this circuit, revisiting these places over and over for a year, trying to gather clues, you know, about his son's death. And his chapters are told through diary entries / letters to his wife. And that's
who he's kind of abandoned to follow this obsessive path for this, driven by guilt. Yeah, he's an amazing character, and he's written on the side of his van. I'm looking, you know, he's very open, and
son murdered clues, which, you know, that's from real life. I saw that.
No way.
The parking lot in like Beatty or Tonopah or somewhere.
Wow.
I actually saw that and stored that away and said, someday I'm gonna.
Oh my! You know, it's so powerful. And and what he does, he's also kind of picking up when he hears about murders that he thinks might be done by rovers. He goes and contacts these people, and he's not very good at it. So he's also
he doesn't know they're rovers at that point. He just thinks.
Well, he's wondering oh yeah, right.
Yeah.
If it just has to sound
it's like a serial killer who has the same MO, and he learns in the course of the book that it is
right. He
rovers,
doesn't.
But
he's not he's not. He doesn't know they're rovers at first at all, but. It's interesting because he doesn't know how to do that. Part of his character is that he's really difficult communicating with people. So he's reading like a self-help book that helps him communicate with people. And it's like this guy's like, so it's like this kind of self-improvement guy who's also a very, very Christian and has, you know, as the biblical.
It alternates between the Bible and his self-help book. It's
amazing. Like, and his character is really, he's this human character that also has a path, and in so many ways I think he ends kind of make the connection between people that become, once he finds out they're rovers, becomes a, I don't know if I want to say like, but he ends up going after rovers once he knows. And it's interesting that they talk the way you talk about the transition for rovers is that every turning, which is turning represents when somebody becomes a rover, every turning is a love story. And then there's also the fact that every time somebody there's a parallel, which is not exact, but it's like this, there's this also turning people into vampire killers because they've lost somebody they loved. So you've got this incredible wheel of like loss and vengeance and pain and misery. It's like, and this wheel just keeps on wobbling viciously along. And it's like, you know, it's,
right, it speeds along towards the end there.
And I want to make it clear to people that are listening that it's the tension in this book is amazing. Like what's astonishing to me is that there's so much that we're talking about in terms of themes, but it works as this like incredible, blisteringly fast, pace.
A revenge thriller.
It's a revenge thriller, so it's moving along like there's no each chapter goes so well with the next. The confluences of when characters come together totally work, leads you in places where you had no idea it was going to go. And it's just like, at the same time, you're getting these great reading about these characters and you're learning about this world. It's also driving you through the story. And the fiends are a big part of that. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about that.
I'm just going to finish out with Charles that those chapters are told through those diary entries. And that was intentionally done as an homage to Dracula, the original novel, because Dracula is an epistolary novel that's all told through diary entries, letters, and early wire recordings, transcriptions of early wire recordings.
Yeah, that's great.
That was the thing. And then the fourth kind of thread of the book is this gang of rover bikers called the Fiends. And, I kind of call them they're like, I don't know, it's not comic relief, but it kind of gets you out into, even though they have their own intense interpersonal, play among each other, because the gang is sort of falling apart they've been together about 7 or 8 years, and it's falling apart, and we meet them at a point where nobody in the gang is getting along very well, and everybody has their partner that they're teamed up with, and the partners are all sort of bickering all the time and fighting. And there's some unusual, couplings in there. And within the gang, there are people that were a guy who was turned right after World War II, and it goes all the way back to there's a guy who was in Spain in the 1700s who's been around that long. So you have this wide range of rovers there in this gang. And this is just one persona they've adopted for now. You can tell they've obviously, you kind of get the sense that they've switched personas throughout the years, especially towards the end. You see at the end kind of what happens to the survivors of the of the gang. But it was interesting bringing all those four threads together. It's what I read somewhere in a Robert Stone biography. The biographer described a lot of Stone's books. He's a big influence on me. Has convergence novels where you set up 4 different, 3 or 4 different lines, and you bring them together. And the fun is in how you're gonna make these people, their paths cross, make it important. That's part of the fun of telling the story.
Yeah, and it really works in this case because that happens. It happens twice, and it's interesting. The book kind of ends. Well, the July 4th, which is the bicentennial, happens kind of not exactly at the end, but it's really at kind of the last big, kind of the climax. And it's interesting because I really am amazed, like your detail. Like there's one part, since we're talking in San Diego, there's one part where you mention a game that's between the Dodgers and the Padres, which was funny because the Padres won, which would make sense. I looked it up. You don't say that. I looked it up. The Padres won that game, which is funny because they always beat the Dodgers in my experience. But the other thing is that the detail is amazing. Like you talk about the 2 of the rovers going through Phoenix, and it's amazing because you're like they've been through here a few times, the first time in horse and cart. And one of the things you do, the bicentennial, the bicentennial itself is like the rest of the country's having a party, and these people are
sort of a silly party. It is sort of a silly party. Yeah, and you only see the silly Bob Hope dressed like George Washington on TV.
Yeah, I mean they're not really part of that. But what's interesting is that each one of them is actually living history of America, which is amazing because they're like he says, the first time they went through Phoenix, they were in cart and a horse, and there was an interesting thing about like the one of the big convention centers in downtown Phoenix is over a chop suey restaurant that they used to love, which I looked up. I think that's Sing Hai. You don't say that, but your research is so good that it's this one restaurant, and it's interesting too because America is changing at that point, and it's a perfect time period to choose. I was wondering if this was part of your decision that if they were rovers now, nowadays there's compute DNA evidence, recordings, phone, cell phones, and all that.
That was
so definitely a good time to choose.
That's definitely a concern. Was one of the main reasons to set it back then was because I wouldn't be able to write this now at all. I mean, I wouldn't even know. You'd spend so many times solving the problems of how they got around things like DNA and cameras and stuff. That it wouldn't be fun for me. But back then, 76, that was sort of the era of the serial killer. I mean, there were at one point I read a thing, and I think it said at one point there was something like 100 serial killers traveling, loose in the United States, and those are the ones we know about because there's these guy that they caught a couple of years ago in the Central California who killed all those people, and they just now identified him 60 years later because of 20 years later, 30, 40 years later because of DNA now. So I kind of wanted to play on that idea because
that's a good idea. And also what's interesting is that
it was like the end of the savage wild West,
Well, there's the Savage Wild West, but also you address there's this one part where I know we're running out of time here, but they say, the first time they visited Phoenix, they rode in on horseback. They've watched the city grow from a dusty cluster of saloons, dance halls, and assay offices into a sprawl of suburbs that's filled the valley. And now the powers that be are pulling down old Phoenix. And I'll cut because we don't have time. I can't, unfortunately, read the whole thing. But you're also at a time of urban development, so that all these kind of, and you see it in downtown LA when the Bunker Hill was wiped out. All these places were full of like these kind of people that were down on their luck. There was much more vibrant urban area of people that were kind of transients. And the urban blight that was taking place during the 70s kind of wipes out these places, which were the feeding grounds of the rovers over time, which I thought was fascinating.
Because they did feed. They feed on junkies, winos, hobos,
just like serial killers, people who won't be missed.
Yeah, because they won't be missed. That's what they, their whole thing is they get these people who nobody will know when they're gone. And that is what serial killers did too. So, yeah, I was proud of the Phoenix stuff because I was interviewed yesterday by a guy grew up in Phoenix, and he's like, how did you know all this stuff? And I had actually never been to Phoenix. That was
really, that's amazing. Yeah.
Which is rare because most of my books are, take place like 6 blocks from my house.
But also I have a theory that you've been to absolutely every motel you've written about, which is funny because a lot of Willie Vlautin, you turned me on to his book Motel Life, but it's like, and that there was a lot of us, like I thought of the brothers, that there was some resonance between that book and the dynamic between the brothers, which really is the most, the most amazing. And really that dynamic between Jesse and Edgar is like, it ends like you can't talk about it, but it ends in such an amazing way because it is not like this. There's not really a happy end. There's not a happy ending, except in a weird way. There's the best, happiest ending of all. And on that note, I'd like to mention the fact that this ending, which is just beautiful, it's kind of within a page. Richard takes this like terrible situation for Jesse. I think it's not giving away to say, takes a terrible situation where you have this incredible feeling of dread and pain and finality, and switches on itself. And I remembered you said call it mice and men. Kind of said to the Southwest, but there's also like real like Lincoln in the Bardo for like George Saunders. Your sense of humor is a lot more subtle than his, but like there is a lot of that Lincoln in the Bardo, not only from some of the well-researched historical stuff, but the stuff that has to do with living and dying and being attached to life and letting go. Like that's the whole thing is about addiction, people's obsessions with addictions writ large. So it's like, even though they're like junkies, but all of them are like grieving some loss they can't get over, and that's really the heart of the book. And the letting go of that attachment to that loss. I'm getting goosebumps even thinking about it because it's done so well in the book. Like getting over those attachments to what you've lost in order to be free, no matter what the content of that freedom is just so powerful. And I want to mention here that
it's
of course
funny
about Kim, but we'll talk about that in a second. Go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead. You can let's finish.
No, I want to hear what you. I want to hear what you have to
go
say.
back to Saunders because I cite him as one of the influences on this book because when I'm writing a book, I'm still reading, I'm still watching movies, so I'm always consuming stuff. And I had written I was actually editing Rovers when I read Lincoln in the Bardo. And I was having trouble with figuring out how many rules I had to give, how much guidance I had to give people about what rover behavior is and what the lore is. And, I didn't want to have to give too much of that. I just wanted to let it happen. And when I read Lincoln in the Bardo, I saw how he detailed that world in the cemetery, the world of the ghosts, and the cosmology that he created. That's world building. And he did it, but he did it very, very subtly. And I saw that I could give people much less than I was giving them in the book at that point. So I got to go back and cut out some of the things that have been bothering me, the explanatory paragraphs. I still had to have a few because you kind of have to give that. But I figured most people know vampire stuff. And I don't have to go into explaining all those rules. And
you kind of played off that. You kind of played off that with the characters. Are like, what do you mean, vampires? Call them what you want, but this is what they are.
One of my original original intentions was to try to write the book without ever saying the word vampire.
I think that was when the word vampire was first used. It's like 100 pages in or something like that.
And it became impossible when you have two people in the 20th century talking in 1976, talking about people who roam at night and drink blood and are somewhat immortal. Someone's going to say vampire. It's just, unless you're in some alternate universe. So I had to break down and do it.
Well, it still works because you don't think of them as like the I don't know. It completely worked because you had the luck of having some of the genre conventions, but you, like we were saying in the beginning, you made it their own. You also had a coffee shop named Helsing's, which I thought was funny. That must have been about Von Helsing.
Real place.
Oh, was it really?
Place. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I was talking to, I looked it up. I was looking around old photos of downtown Phoenix, to give me
no
inspiration,
way.
And there it was. There were like 3 of them. And,
that must have blown your mind because
I was like, right on.
I thought you made it up. I'm like, that's a little on the nose, and you're like, nope, just historical facts. Sorry.
Historical facts. Right.
By the way, I hope I'm interested in you writing more historical fiction. I know you've dabbled in the past with a wolves story, but there's I was really impressed by all the stuff about the Carnival, which I thought was fascinating. A lot of the stuff, I'm like, that's a lot of work to learn that stuff.
I love the part too when they drive down Route 66. They're on the route and they talk about seeing the orange groves and how Route 6. It's the very beginning of the book. Where how Route 66 evolved with the motels and the orange grove.
No, I remember that.
I like that bit.
No, I do too, because I mean, we both like travel in the desert.
Right.
We've even run into each other. And in fact, when we ran into each other, I learned the story about how your wife made the ending of the book. Do you want to, do you want to get into that?
Yeah, well, I'd written what I thought was the ending, which was another chapter, another voice completely it ended on. And my wife said, 3 chapters before that chapter, that's the real ending of the book. So I ended up going back and cutting the end of that chapter and moving it to the end, which violated this perfect structure I had worked out for the book. But it ended up being, the absolute perfect ending.
Oh, it's perfect.
In that, as we say, it's a bookend in a way to what happens in the beginning. And it really worked out. So, I thank her for that. She's the only, nobody else reads my work before it goes to my agent or if I let someone read it, it's on the promise that they can't say a word to me about it.
Right.
I don't want any other input until it gets to my agent. And my wife is the only person who reads it. So
you chose the right person. You chose the right person because that ending blew my mind. Really, really great. Yeah. Now I would go on and on, and maybe we can meet at Woronkock and continue. But we want to see what the questions are. I see on the side too. There's a chat. Matthew Berger points out that it's now a mobile shop called Van Helsing's. But I don't. I wonder if he's talking about the Helsing's.
The coffee shop?
Yeah, I guess it's mobile
joking.
now. Oh, is he?
Joking.
Okay. Oh, yeah, he's joking there. Okay. So the first question we have is from Matthew. It's like, what was your favorite piece of research for this book that didn't make it into the novel? That's an excellent question.
Let me think. Well, I go super deep in the research, and because it allows me not to write, so I can just spend like hours looking up. In this case, Edgar, the mentally challenged kid, he's a guy. He's fascinated by. He's obsessed with kids show hosts in all the cities that they visit. So if they hit St. Louis, he knows. Oh, it's Captain Delta who shows the Popeye cartoons. I don't know, Jim, if you're old enough to remember that. When we were kids, they had a cartoon host. It would be a guy who would show he would be on the afternoon when you get home from school, and he would show like he was a live host dressed up like a sea captain. Yeah. And he would introduce the Three
I remember that
thing. Yeah. So
there was one called Icky in the book. There's one called Icky. I forget, but the name was fantastic.
I think that might be Gibby Haynes from the Butthole Surfer's dad, or he's Mr. Peppermint. He's Mr. Peppermint. He really was. He was a kid show in Texas. But so like something like that, I spent hours looking at footage of these shows, that have been, stored on YouTube, and just, it had no practical application at all for the book. But, it kept me from not having to, I didn't have to write that much. But a lot of my Phoenix research I couldn't use, because the thing about research is that you can't give too much, or you're just going to overwhelm the person, or you kind of look like, you can kind of see that sometimes, like authors are trying to get everything they got on the page. And I'm much more concerned with keeping the story moving and keeping the characters doing what they do than, showing off the knowledge. So I try to just put in just enough to make people go, wow. But, well, like Jim, I knew the name of that Chinese restaurant that is buried under the convention center, but I didn't put that in. It sounded better to say a chop suey.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. So your favorite bit of research the book that didn't make in the novel?
I would say, there was tons of great stuff that I had that I couldn't use. The kid show stuff, the Phoenix, lots of Phoenix stuff. I can't think of anything in, particular, right. But I had much more than I used.
Right. And I know there was a lot of like flashbacks, like the stuff about Quantrill's Raiders. That was really incredible. That whole description.
That's a, true story. Of course, And
that was interesting. Like, it is really, these people knew more about America because they lived it, but it wasn't the America that,
the bartender says to him, and he's getting into a fight with a bartender about this thing that happened 100 years ago, or whatever. And the bartender's like, why are you getting all steamed up about ancient history? And he's like, it's like not ancient history to me, I was there.
And even so, like, I think Jesse was born on the centennial, right? I mean, so it's his 100th birthday that year. Like, it's so interesting. And then the second question, also excellent. What is the most difficult part of writing from the perspective of an immortal character? What do you have to do to put yourself in the mentality of someone who does not age the same way you do?
I think
it's a great question.
In the same way that I was going to write about someone who is a thief or is a junkie, criminal of some kind, it's sort of like method acting. I just sit down and think what I would think if I was immortal. And for me, it seems to work out a lot in this book as being everybody's pretty sad. They've had a lot of trouble. They've had a lot of trouble in the past, and they're all sort of running from their past. And a lot of them have partnered up with other people, and that's how they kind of get their joy now, is by being with the person that they're with, and hopefully they think they'll be with them forever. Many of these people become rovers because they don't want any more loss. They are scarred by their loss. So if you become immortal, you don't have to worry about that anymore. There's a guy who's afraid of dying who becomes one because he's afraid of dying. So they have I list a bunch of reasons why people become immortal. But you just in anything you're going to do, you just go back and you put yourself in the character. You do your research so you can figure out where someone was born, and then you have to think about what would that have been like to have been born in Spain, and you don't want to put the obvious stuff, so you want to come up with something else. And in the case of that character, I said that he learned to hunt as a kid, and not realizing that was perfect. And after I wrote it, I go, shit, that's perfect, because he's now a hunter. 300 years later, he hunts humans, but he was an obsessive hunter when he was a kid.
Well,
Good.
Well, that's a great example, because the exact same character, when the idea of going back to his where he grew up, he's like, I have forgotten all about that. I won't recognize. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I don't think about the stuff that I've lost, like my family, but he thinks about what makes
right. I put it out of my head.
Yeah, no, it's good, and it's funny because
I say this is like my old man book, because Jim, the way that they're my grumpy old man book, because someone in the books is always saying like, oh, it was better before. Or they're remembering like Phoenix, like, man, this neighborhood was great before they tore it down. That's just me grumping around LA. Like
totally like Los Angeles. I'm the same way in Los Angeles.
Why the hell
like,
did they tear this down?
I can't believe there's this coffee shop on this crappy alley in
why they tear down
LA?
Girls of Glitter Gulch downtown Vegas? You know, like and put up some mega hotel. You know, so,
no, that's a great.
Grump about.
That's great. I didn't think about that. That's perfect. There's it's interesting too.
And they grump about the electric lights changing.
Well, and one of them talks like to the point of the question is like he doesn't talk on the phone long because he never got used to him. Right? Can you imagine? Everyone talks on the phone now.
Jesse.
But he doesn't want to talk on the phone. He doesn't like it. The extreme example, which I don't think will give away any, is this rancher in like West Texas who's managed to keep a huge ranch exactly like it was ever since the 1840, and even kind of this feudal relationships of families that he kind of controls for generations. Yet he has a TV because his wife's bored. I love that. He had a TV because his wife was bored living that way.
Right.
That was a great and
he
thing.
He can't abide electric light. You know, like he sits with like oil lamps around him.
Yeah, and it's in the. To your point too about nostalgia, like one of the characters says that nostalgia is a weakness because she's lost so much in her 200 years. She'd drown in tears if she mourned at all, which is just great. That's perfect example. I have another question, but did you have more you wanted to say?
Yeah, go ahead. No, I'm good.
What was one of the scenes from this book that brought you the most joy to write? And I kind of asked you like this about sentences, and you're a little. In the past, you've been a little laconic, or about talking about this. But do you have one that?
Yeah, when I'm writing it, it's really hard, to enjoy it because I'm just kind of struggling to get it out. But when you've hit it big, I particularly like the scene down Route 6. The first two chapters, I think,
they're amazing.
Because they get everything going and they encapsulate the feeling of the entire book. So when I finished those, I knew that I had something that I could write this novel. And I think that also the end, when I figured out the end and actually figured out what was going to happen and how it was going to, work into the structure, that was another thing that I was like super pleased with, and it read exactly like I wanted it to read. Because I'm really big on rhythm of sentences and rhythm in paragraphs. I'm not just sitting down. I rewrite this stuff constantly to some. It's almost like a musician has a rhythm in their head, and as a writer, I have this rhythm that kind of dominates the way I put syllables together. It reads and. I sometimes read other writers and I'm like, that has no music in it. It has no, but mine to me, because I guess it's my rhythm. It's like, at times it's very musical. It's easy to read. It keeps you flowing forward. I try never to stop you with a word choice or, a wrong syllable, too many syllable word. I really agonize over this stuff. In addition to, just trying to write great descriptions. My thing is to write descriptions that are as short but as great as possible. I don't want to go on.
That's what I was going to say. Like you were a brilliant short story writer, and what made a lot of your short stories work is that economically you get across a mood and a feeling, but also just the mechanics of the writing. Like there was this great scene where you were talking about when Jesse and Claudine meet, and it's like right then she redrew the whole map of his world, and it was just like that was perfect. Like it's just these kind of brief poetic sentences.
That's like as deep as I like to go. Into the. You want to get if you get it right in one or two sentences, you don't need 20 sentences.
Because otherwise it would be corny.
Reiterate and go over and over and expand.
Yeah.
It.
Yep. No, it really works. Really works. There's another question. So was there the scenes that you're talking about were basically like the beginning and the end? That's great. How was writing the relationship between the brothers in Rovers? How did you navigate the parallels between them and the brothers in Mice and Men, two of the most iconic characters in literature?
They're not brothers in Mice and Men. I think they're just buddies. And, but I hadn't read of Mice and Men since high school. So I only know it, I only kind of had this vague outline of what it was. These being brothers have a much closer relationship than Lenny and George, who were more like co-workers, kind of Lenny, George sort of took care of Lenny and made sure he didn't get into trouble. These two have 100 years of history of bad things. The mentally challenged brother resents his brother for turning him and kind of dooming him to live this life. So there's this resentment that builds up throughout the book of why did he do this to me? And he lied to me, and he told me, he didn't tell me what was going to happen, that I was going to couldn't go out in the daytime and would have to stay in these shitty motel rooms all the time. And so I took the Lenny and George relationship as a template, but it's really just shorthand. It's not much like their relationship at all, other than the fact that one of them is mentally challenged.
And really, I remember Mice and Men. I didn't know like the level of it read more to me because I don't think in Mice and Men you get inside Lenny's head very much. It's more like the boy, like we were talking about in Sound and Fury. But what comes across is this, like he's also this guy who wants to be able to do his own thing, and he can never do his own thing. So it's just like being a little kid, right? When you're a little kid, you want to do stuff, you don't have any control over any of it. You want control, except this guy's 6'4", and he's just this huge barrel of a man, and he's travels. And so he's got all these frustrations, and they come out, and the resentment, and the resentment between the brothers' relationship is very complicated and really well done, and there's a lot of the way it ends is remarkable.
It's a family story. In addition, you have this. They're vampires, yeah. But what you're really reading is a family, a story about two brothers. You're not reading
the Fiends are definitely a family dysfunctionally, and also the Charles Saunders is. He's basically talking to his family, right?
There's a lot of family in the book, yeah.
Yep, that's true. Let's see where we're at. I think that we've got all the questions, but there's other, there's plenty that we could talk about. I guess we're going till 8, but a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, like the historical stuff, like there's some of the songs. This guy Edgar likes to sing, which is great too, because it's like you can, and that's all described really well. But I think one of the last songs he sings is I looked it up. It's a Stanley Collins song. I guess the guy that wrote Camptown Races, and so it's this song that was popular.
Stephen Foster.
I'm sorry, Stephen Foster. Stephen Foster. I got the name wrong. Sorry, but it's like that era. Like it's the kind of, so all the stuff is like the historical stuff is really well done.
I would not die in wintertime, I think is the name of the song. When
it's dark and cold.
It was his mom's favorite song.
Yep. Yeah, and it's just that type of light touch with the historical stuff. I'm hoping for some more historical stuff, and also I've been thinking about like things like between this and also the Smack with the kind of con men. I was thinking like a historical history. I'd like to see a Richard Lange take on the historical take on traveling salesman from this time. You also know that I'm like consumed with the idea of ideas for fan fiction for Rovers, where it's like, what would it be like with the Rovers during the hippie days, right? So it'd be kind of like Manson's a Rover, right?
Now it's been optioned for a TV show.
That's awesome.
Publication. So if it ever gets made, we have many avenues to, many more avenues to explore, and it'll be kind of like fan fiction, of the book. The book won't last a whole season, or we'll make one season, but you got to go on after that.
I was walking around after I read the book and said, I was thinking about, a lot about what being a rover and thinking about the life of the rovers and thinking about who were rovers. And the serial killer one is compelling, but it's like just how it would work, how it would work. It's like, it's an amazing. You really did a great job of building the world.
Once you read the book, you'll be seeing them everywhere. Every
That's
dive
right.
bar you walk into, you'll be trying to spot them.
That's exactly right. Richard, it was great talking with you.
Yeah, thank you, Jim, for doing this.
Honestly, this was such a delight. Thank you both so much, and thank you all for coming tonight. I'm gonna go pick up Rovers right now and read it. Sounds amazing.
Oh, you'll read it. You'll read it like really. It's hard. It's funny when I work at the library, we see all the new fiction, and one of the big blurbs is like, I couldn't put it down. And it's like, you probably put it down. Mm-hmm. I mean, but this one was like that. Like it was, I couldn't believe how much, like the momentum of the book is phenomenal, and there's so much in it, but it doesn't. You're not overwhelmed by there's no exposition. It's just everything's part of the story and the character, and it's really well done, Richard. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations. And congratulations on the option. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, don't forget everybody who are watching tonight and anyone who might be viewing this event at a later time, because we will put this up on our YouTube channel. You can buy signed and personalized copies of Rovers at Mysterious Galaxy. The link is right here on the little blue button right there. You can also give us a call, come in the store, go online. We have all the avenues open to you. So don't forget to buy your copy and have a great night. Thank you all so much.
Oh, actually, I wanted to mention one more thing is that this is the first of your books that's it's an audiobook. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I've been listening to it. It's great. So yeah,
it must be weird to like that. Must be really great. This is a big week for you, and I hope congratulations.
Yeah,
and
thank you, Jim.
Enjoying it.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.